Welcome to Midnight Casebook, where every shadow hides a secret and every mystery begs to be solved. Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of Father Brown and She Whispered Before She Died, a fan-made story paying homage to the brilliance of G.K., Chesterton's legendary detective. We'd love to have you along for this enigmatic journey. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from. Share your theories, and if you spot any inconsistencies, don't hesitate to call them out. Your keen eyes and sharp minds help us craft even more captivating mysteries in the future. Chapter 1. The Confession in the Rain. The rain had been falling for hours, as if the heavens themselves were weeping over the sins of the world. The streets of the city were slick, reflecting the flickering neon lights that buzzed like the last breath of a dying man. Father Brown adjusted his collar, stepping out from the shadows of the alley and into the guttered rain. He had always found solace in the sound of rain, the way it washed the filth from the world, if only for a moment. His boots splashed through the puddles as he made his way toward the small pub at the end of the street, a place where the air was thick with cigarette smoke and the conversations were even thicker. The kind of place where secrets were traded like currency, and the truth was always a little harder to find. He'd been sent here by a worried parishioner, a woman who claimed to have witnessed something terrible, but like most things in this city, it was never as simple as it seemed. The woman had been vague, her words wrapped in layers of fear and guilt, but one thing had been clear. There was a dark shadow hanging over the place, and it had already taken one life. Father Brown had an uncanny ability to see through the fog of deception that clouded the minds of others. It wasn't some divine gift, but rather a simple understanding of human nature, something that came from years of hearing, confessions, listening to the whispered sins of the troubled souls who sought his counsel. People lied to him, yes, but they never lied to themselves for long. In the end, the truth always found its way to the surface. As he pushed open the door of the pub, the bell above it jingled softly. The noise inside quieted for a moment. The clinking of glasses and murmurs of conversation momentarily stilled. A pair of eyes followed him as he stepped into the dim light, but no one said a word. Father Brown had the sort of face that didn't inspire much reaction, the kind of face that could blend into the background like a piece of furniture. The bartender, a stocky man with a face as hard as the wood he polished, nodded toward him. "We don't get many priests around here," he said, his voice rough from too much whiskey and too many years in the business. Father Brown gave him a small smile, the kind that only came from years of learning to see beneath the surface. "I'm not here for a drink," he said, his voice low and calm, almost a whisper. "I'm looking for someone." The bartender raised an eyebrow. "You might want to be careful. People here don't take kindly to the law or anything that smells like it." "I'm not here to enforce the law," Father Brown said, his voice soothing. "I'm just looking for a confession." There was a pause, a brief moment of silence, and then the bartender nodded. "Down the hall. Last booth on the right. But don't say I didn't warn you." Father Brown nodded his thanks and made his way through the smoke-filled room, ignoring the men who watched him with suspicion in their eyes. He wasn't here to make friends. He was here to find answers. The smell of stale beer and sweat clung to the walls, but he was used to it. He'd been in worse places, places where the sins were more blatant, more violent, but the truth was still the same. He reached the booth, where a woman sat alone, her back to him. Her posture was stiff, like a bird perched on a branch, ready to fly away at the slightest sign of danger. She was dressed in black, her face partially hidden by the shadows cast by the low-hanging light. When she turned toward him, he saw the cold, calculating look in her eyes, the kind of look that belonged to someone who had learned to survive in a world that didn't care for morality. "Your Father Brown, I presume?" she asked, her voice soft but sharp, like a knife hidden in velvet. "That's right," he said, taking a seat across from her. "And you are?" "Alice Hargrave," she said, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I believe you're here about the man who was murdered." Father Brown studied her for a moment, his gaze unwavering. There was something about her, something that didn't sit right. She was too polished, too controlled. "I've heard rumors," he said, his voice steady, "but I'm here to hear it from you." Alice leaned forward slightly, her eyes scanning the room before she spoke. "A man died here, Father. A man who was not what he seemed. I saw it happen, and I can't keep it inside anymore." She hesitated, the guilt clear in her voice. "But it's not just the murder. There's more to it, a lot more." Father Brown didn't react. He had seen this before. People often came to him with half-truths, hoping to unburden themselves, but always holding back the real story. He knew that whatever Alice was hiding, it was something deep, something buried beneath layers of fear and self-preservation. "Tell me everything," he said softly, his tone reassuring. She looked around once more before she began. "His name was Gregory. He was involved with some dangerous people, people who don't like loose ends. They knew too much about him, and when he started to get nervous, they decided to shut him up." Father Brown nodded. "And you were involved with him?" She gave him a sharp look. "I wasn't involved in his business, but I knew him. He came to me for help. He said he was being watched, that his life was in danger. I didn't believe him at first, but then I saw things, strange things, people following him, people watching me." "And what did you do?" Father Brown asked, his voice gentle but probing. "I did what anyone would do. I told him to leave, to get away before it was too late. But it was already too late. He was killed last night." Her voice faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "I think they were after me too. I think they know I know too much." Father Brown was silent for a moment, his mind working through the pieces of the puzzle. He had seen this kind of fear before. It wasn't the fear of a witness. It was the fear of someone who had crossed a line and couldn't go back. "Who are they, Alice?" She shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "I can't say. They'll come after me, after all of us." Father Brown leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping the edge of the table. "You don't have to tell me everything, but I do need to know one thing." He paused. "Did you kill him?" She stared at him, her eyes narrowing. "What are you implying?" "I'm not implying anything," Father Brown said calmly. "But you're here, and you're asking for help. I'm only trying to understand why." Alice's expression shifted, a flicker of something dark passing over her face. For a moment, she seemed like a completely different person, cold, calculating, and dangerous. "I didn't kill him, Father, but I know who did." The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and suffocating. Father Brown didn't flinch. "Then why come to me? Why not go to the police?" "Because they're part of it," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of her confession. The police are in on it. The ones who killed Gregory, they have people everywhere. They'll make sure the truth never comes out. Father Brown sat back, taking it all in. He had suspected as much. The city had always been full of corruption, of men and women willing to trade their souls for power or money. But to hear it from her lips, it was a bitter confirmation of what he had already known. "I can't protect you from the malice," Father Brown said quietly, "but I can find the truth." Alice's eyes widened. "You don't understand, Father. They'll—" But Father Brown didn't let her finish. He stood up, slowly, his gaze fixed on her. "I understand more than you think." He turned and made his way to the door, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the room. The rain outside was still falling, but now it seemed more like a cleansing, a purification. He wasn't just dealing with a murder. He was dealing with something much darker, something that went deeper than just crime. It was the corruption of the soul itself. Father Brown stepped out into the rain, the cold droplets biting at his skin, but he felt no fear. He had faced the darkness before, and he knew that sometimes the only way to uncover the truth was to walk right into it. Chapter 2. A Locket Left Behind. The rain hadn't let up for days. The city was like a forgotten church, its steeples swallowed in the mist, its stained glass windows fading in the drizzle. The streets were slick and treacherous, filled with the kind of people who found their salvation not in the pews, but in the dark corners of smoky bars and alleys. Father Brown had walked these streets before, but there was something different about tonight, something heavy in the air that even the rain couldn't wash away. He stepped out of the church into the evening mist, the collar of his coat turned up against the cold. The city had a way of twisting things, of turning the purest souls into something dark and unrecognizable. Father Brown had seen it happen, time and time again. People came to him with their confessions, but few ever spoke the whole truth. It was as if the weight of sin was too much to bear, so they'd hide it behind a smile or a lie. But Father Brown wasn't fooled. He knew sin had a way of creeping into the corners of the heart, even in the most unlikely places. The case that had brought him out tonight was one of those half-truths. A woman had come to him, pale and trembling, asking for help. She spoke in riddles, her words wrapped in a veil of fear and desperation. "He's gone, Father," she had said, "and I know he didn't leave by choice." The woman had spoken of a man named Thomas, a man who had vanished without a trace, leaving nothing behind but a locket, she claimed, that held the key to his disappearance. Father Brown had listened quietly, as he always did. There was no rush in his movements, no hurry in his speech. He wasn't like the detectives or the hard-boiled men who strode through life with a chip on their shoulder. He was patient, and patience had a way of revealing what was hidden. The woman, whose name was Eleanor, had handed him the locket. It was delicate, engraved with intricate designs, and inside it was a tiny portrait of a man. "He wore this around his neck," she said, her hands trembling as she passed it over to him. "I don't know why, but it's all that's left of him." Father Brown examined the locket carefully, his fingers brushing over the smooth metal. It was old, but well cared for, like something cherished. He had an odd feeling about it, like the locket itself was trying to tell him something, but he couldn't yet understand its message. "Eleanor," he said, lifting his eyes to meet hers. "You don't know where he went? No letters? No signs of a struggle?" She shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. Nothing, Father. Just gone. One moment he was there, and the next, nothing. His apartment's locked, his things untouched. It's like he disappeared into thin air. Father Brown considered this. People didn't disappear like that. There was always something, some trace left behind. It could be a person, a motive, or, more often than not, money. But this didn't feel like a case of robbery or foul play. It felt like something deeper, something more twisted. He tucked the locket into his pocket, giving Eleanor a reassuring smile. I'll see what I can find. The rain had begun to fall heavier as Father Brown walked the narrow streets toward Thomas's apartment. It was the kind of place that had seen better days. The paint was chipped, the windows cracked, and the door had a sagging, tired look to it, as if the whole building had given up on holding itself together. Father Brown knocked twice, the sound muffled by the downpour. When no one answered, he pushed the door open with a creak. The apartment was small and sparsely furnished. There was an old armchair by the window, a few books scattered on a coffee table, and a small kitchen with half-empty cupboards. But it was the bedroom that caught Father Brown's attention. The bed was neatly made, the closet closed tight, and the floor spotless, save for a single smudge near the corner. It was a small thing, almost insignificant, but Father Brown had learned to pay attention to the details. He knelt down and examined the mark closely. It wasn't dirt or dust, it was blood. Father Brown's gaze shifted to the nightstand. There was nothing unusual about it at first glance, but as he opened the drawer, his fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. A small revolver, its handle worn with use. He held it for a moment, studying it carefully. It didn't seem out of place, but he knew it was dangerous. No one kept a gun unless they had a reason to. He stood up and turned toward the window, his eyes scanning the street below. It was the kind of street where no one looked twice at strangers, where secrets lived in the cracks of every building. But someone had seen something. He was sure of it. It was just a matter of finding the right person to talk. Father Brown left the apartment and made his way to the nearest bar. It was a dark, dingy place, the kind of spot where the shadows were always just a little too thick and the conversations a little too guarded. He sat at the counter, ordered a drink, and waited. It didn't take long before someone noticed him. The man who approached was tall, with a sharp jaw and a face that looked like it had been carved out of stone. His eyes were dark and calculating, and when he spoke, his voice was low and gruff. "You're not from around here," he said, his gaze flicking over Father Brown with suspicion. "What's a priest doing in a place like this?" Father Brown didn't flinch. "Looking for answers," he said calmly, his eyes steady. The man snorted. "Answers? You won't find any here. Not unless you know the right people." Father Brown raised an eyebrow. "And you're one of those people?" The man's smile was sharp. "Depends on what you're asking. But if you're looking for Thomas, you're out of luck. Last I heard, he skipped town with some people who weren't too kind about being crossed." "Who are they?" Father Brown asked, his voice steady. The man leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You don't want to know. Trust me, Father, some things are better left buried." Father Brown studied him for a moment, then stood up, his hand reaching for his coat. "Maybe, but I don't believe in burying things, not when the truth needs to be found." The man laughed, but it was a hollow, empty sound. "You're a fool if you think you can dig up the truth around here. People like you don't last long in this city." Father Brown turned to leave, but the man's words followed him out into the rain. Watch your back, Father. There's more than just crime in this city. Father Brown didn't respond. He didn't need to. He knew exactly what the man meant. The city was full of rot, but the rot wasn't just in the streets or the criminals, it was in the hearts of the people, in the lies they told themselves to sleep at night. He walked down the street, his coat flapping in the wind, his mind racing. There was something about the locket, about Thomas's disappearance, that didn't add up. He knew the truth was closer than he thought. He just needed to find the right piece to the puzzle. Later that night, he returned to Eleanor's apartment, his mind still working through the possibilities. He had learned a lot, but there was one thing that didn't sit right. The locket. It wasn't just a keepsake, it was a message, a symbol. But what was it trying to say? When he arrived at the apartment, he was greeted by a familiar face, a face he'd seen only briefly before. It was Eleanor's husband, a man with a sharp suit and an even sharper look in his eyes. "You found something, didn't you?" he asked, his voice low and tight with tension. Father Brown nodded. "I did, but it's not what you think." The man's eyes flicked to the locket in Father Brown's hand, and a cold smile crept across his face. "You've got it, haven't you? The key to everything." Father Brown didn't flinch. "It's not the key to anything, Mr. Hargrave. It's just a piece of the puzzle, and I think you know exactly what happened to your brother-in-law." Hargrave's face tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." Father Brown took a step closer. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. Thomas didn't disappear. He was killed, and the locket was left behind as a message, a warning." The man's face went pale, his lips trembling slightly. "You don't know what you're getting into, Father." Father Brown's voice was calm, almost serene. "I know exactly what I'm getting into. The truth, and it always has a way of coming to the surface." Hargrave swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room. "You don't know who you're dealing with. You'll be dead before you get the chance to find the rest of the pieces." Father Brown smiled softly. "That may be true, but you'll be the one who pays for it in the end." And with that, he turned and left, the locket still clutched tightly in his hand, the rain continuing to fall around him as the city's secrets slowly began to unravel. Chapter 3. Shadows in the Chapel. The rain was relentless, an endless curtain of grey that draped itself over the city like a shroud. Father Brown stepped out of the small church and into the wet streets, his boots clicking softly on the cobblestone. The air was thick with damp, the kind that made everything feel just a little more oppressive, just a little more dangerous. It was the kind of night that made the city feel like a trap, with shadows lurking in every corner, waiting to close in. But Father Brown was used to the shadows. They didn't scare him. It was late, far past the hour when even the most determined sinners had tucked themselves into the dark corners of their lives. The city had quieted down, but there was still a tension in the air, like the calm before the storm. Father Brown had heard rumors, whispers from the people who sat in the back pews, who didn't want to be seen, who had secrets buried deep beneath their skins. They spoke of a disappearance. A woman had gone missing, a young woman named Elizabeth. She had been a regular in the church, though she hadn't been there for a while now. And then just like that, she vanished. No one knew where. No one had seen anything. Father Brown had been approached by a desperate man, Elizabeth's father, who had asked for help. "Father," he had said, his voice shaky, "she's gone. I don't know who to trust. I've heard things, terrible things." There had been something in the man's eyes, a mixture of fear and something darker, something almost like guilt. Father Brown had agreed to help, though he knew, deep down, that this was no ordinary case. The city had a way of swallowing people whole, of hiding them in the cracks where light never touched. But Father Brown was not so easily deterred. The truth had a way of coming to the surface, even in the darkest corners. He had spent the past few days poking around, asking questions in places where the law didn't reach. He had followed leads to smoky bars, dim alleyways, and decaying buildings. But nothing had led anywhere. No one had seen anything. And yet the more he dug, the more he felt that something was off. There was a story here, one that no one was willing to tell. But Father Brown was patient. He would wait. He would listen. The truth would come to him, as it always did. Tonight, the chapel seemed different. The usual warmth of the place was absent, replaced by an unsettling cold that seemed to seep into his bones. The flickering candlelight cast long, twisting shadows across the pews, and the air smelled faintly of incense and something else, something faintly metallic. Father Brown paused for a moment at the entrance, his eyes scanning the dimly lit interior. There, at the far end of the chapel, a figure stood motionless. A woman, her face obscured by the hood of her coat, her hands clasped in front of her as if in prayer. Father Brown approached slowly, his footsteps silent on the stone floor. He had the odd feeling that she had been waiting for him, that she had known he would come. "Are you lost, miss?" he asked softly, his voice breaking the silence. The woman turned to face him, and for a moment he saw nothing but darkness in her eyes. But then, as if she had been waiting for the right moment, her gaze softened, and she stepped forward. "You're Father Brown," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been expecting you." Father Brown raised an eyebrow. "Expecting me?" he repeated, his tone mild, but with an edge of curiosity. "Yes," she said. "I have a message for you, a warning." She stepped closer, and he could see her face more clearly now. She was young, perhaps no older than 20, with pale skin and dark circles under her eyes, as if sleep had become a distant memory. "Elizabeth is in danger, Father. You need to find her." "How do you know this?" Father Brown asked, his voice steady. "I know, because I'm the one who's been hiding her," the woman said, her voice cracking. "I've been protecting her from them." "From who?" Father Brown pressed. The woman hesitated, her lips trembling. "From the people who own this city, the people who own everything, the ones who think they can control who lives and who dies. They have her, Father. They've been watching her for months. I couldn't keep her safe anymore." Father Brown took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. "And why come to me? Why not go to the authorities?" "Because they're part of it too," she spat, her voice sharp with bitterness. "They don't care about her. They don't care about anyone. She's just another piece in their game." Father Brown paused, taking in her words. The woman was nervous, yes, but there was something in her eyes that told him she was telling the truth, or at least part of it. But there was more to this than just a disappearance. There always was. "You said you were protecting her," Father Brown said slowly. "But what exactly did you do to protect her? Why didn't you come to me sooner?" The woman looked down at her feet, as if ashamed. "I tried," she whispered. "I tried to get her out. But they have eyes everywhere. And when you're in this city, you can't trust anyone. I thought if I kept her hidden, if I kept her away from them, maybe, just maybe, I could keep her safe. But they found her anyway." Father Brown nodded, his gaze thoughtful. And now you want me to find her, to save her." The woman's face was streaked with tears, her shoulders shaking. "Please, I don't know what else to do. I can't do it anymore. They'll kill her if you don't stop them." Father Brown placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch gentle but firm. "Tell me everything you know," he said quietly. "Every detail. Don't leave anything out." She nodded, swallowing hard. Her father, he's involved with them. He's been working with them for years, helping them get what they want. But Elizabeth didn't know. She didn't understand what was happening until it was too late. She got too close. She saw things she shouldn't have. And now they want her gone. Father Brown's mind raced, piecing together the fragments of the story. It all fit too neatly, as if someone had carefully constructed a web of lies and deceit, one thread at a time. But there was still something missing. He could feel it, like a shadow lurking just outside his vision. Something that didn't belong. "Where is she now?" he asked, his voice low and deliberate. The woman looked up at him, her eyes wide with fear. "They've taken her to the old warehouse by the docks. It's where they hide things. People, things they don't want anyone to know about." Father Brown took a deep breath, his mind already working out the next steps. "I'll go there," he said, his voice steady. "But you need to stay here. Stay, hidden. Stay safe." The woman nodded, but her fear was palpable. "Be careful, Father. They won't let her go without a fight." Father Brown turned and made his way to the door, the weight of the woman's words pressing heavily on his chest. The rain had stopped, but the city still felt damp, cold, and suffocating. The docks were a dangerous place, a forgotten corner of the city where the forgotten things were left to rot. But it was also where the answers were waiting. And Father Brown wasn't afraid to face them. When he reached the warehouse, the silence of the place was unnerving. The building was old, its walls scarred by time and neglect, and the windows were boarded up, casting the interior into shadows. But Father Brown didn't hesitate. He walked toward the door, his footsteps steady and sure. There was no fear in him, only resolve. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of rust and salt, and the faint sound of movement echoed through the vast emptiness. Father Brown moved quietly, his senses alert, his mind focused. He didn't need to rush. He knew the truth would reveal itself when the time was right. As he rounded the corner, he saw them. A group of men, rough-looking thugs with hardened faces and cold eyes, stood around a figure huddled in the corner. The woman, Elizabeth, was crouched on the floor, her hands bound, her eyes wide with fear. Father Brown stepped forward, his presence like a calm breeze cutting through the tension. "Leave her alone," he said, his voice firm. The men turned toward him, sneers forming on their lips. "And who are you supposed to be?" one of them growled, his hand twitching toward the gun at his side. Father Brown didn't flinch. "I'm the one who's going to make sure you pay for what you've done," he said quietly. The men laughed, but Father Brown's calmness unnerved them. There was something in his eyes, something steady and unwavering, that made them hesitate. "You think you can just walk in here and tell us what to do?" one of them sneered. "I don't have to tell you anything," Father Brown said softly. "The truth speaks for itself. You've been hiding behind your power, behind your guns, but in the end, it's sin that will catch up with you. It always does." The man froze, his eyes flicking nervously to his companions. Father Brown took another step forward, his voice gentle but firm. "You've sold your souls to the highest bidder, but the truth doesn't stay buried forever." In the silence that followed, the man's face twisted with something like fear. Fear of the truth, the very thing he had been trying to outrun. Father Brown turned to Elizabeth, his voice softening. "You're free now, my child," he said, his eyes filled with compassion. "You've been trapped in the shadows for too long, but the light is here now." The woman looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "You found me," she whispered. Father Brown smiled gently, his voice calm and reassuring. "The truth always finds a way." And with that, the shadows in the chapel began to fade, as if they had never been there at all. Chapter 4. The Woman Who Knew Too Much. The rain was coming down harder than it had any right to that night, and the city looked as though it had been painted with shadows. It wasn't the usual gentle mist that brushed against the streets, but a full-on downpour, the kind that made the world feel like it was drowning under its own weight. Father Brown stepped out of the church, the hem of his coat brushing the wet cobblestones. His eyes were squinted against the rain, but there was something else in his expression, something beyond the weariness of a priest. In a grim city, he was watching, listening, always listening. Tonight, the quiet streets seemed to murmur with secrets, the kind of secrets that could twist a person's soul until it was nothing but a rotting shell. The air hung heavy with the scent of wet stone and oil, the streets slick and glowing under the flickering neon lights from the bars and clubs that lined the gutters. But there was something else in the air, a tension, thick as smoke, choking out the breath of the city. Father Brown had learned to recognize it. It was the same feeling you got when you were about to step into a place where the darkness wasn't just on the outside, but creeping its way through the cracks in people's hearts. He had been called here by a woman who, by all accounts, shouldn't have known his name, but who had known the right strings to pull. He had met her only a few hours ago, sitting nervously in a back booth of a little cafe near the docks. She had been a mystery from the start, the kind of woman who carried herself with a coolness that belied the fear in her eyes. Her name was Margaret, but she had insisted on telling him her story in half-truths and nervous glances. "I need your help," she had said, her voice low, barely a whisper over the hum of the coffee machine. "They've been watching me." Father Brown had taken his time. No rush. He didn't need to hear everything right away. People always said more when you let them think they were in control. So, he had leaned forward, his fingers tapping gently on his teacup. "Who's been watching you, Miss Margaret?" he asked, his voice warm and steady, like he was speaking to an old friend. Her eyes flicked nervously to the window, as if expecting someone to be standing outside, watching. "It's not who you think," she said, shaking her head. They're people who know things that could destroy me. My father used to work for them." Father Brown had stayed quiet, letting her words hang in the air, heavy with meaning. It wasn't the first time someone had come to him with a tale of danger, but there was something different about her. The fear wasn't just for herself. It was the kind of fear a person had when they knew too much about the wrong people. "They don't like loose ends," she added, her voice trembling. And that was when Father Brown knew he had seen enough in his time to recognize the signs. This wasn't just a case of a missing person or a shady business deal gone wrong. No, this was something darker, something that was going to require more than just quiet observation. "Tell me what you know," Father Brown said, his voice soft but insistent. And so she had told him, about her father, a man who had disappeared years ago, vanishing without a trace after a run-in with some of the city's most dangerous people. She told him about the whispers she had heard, the rumors about her father's connection to a corrupt group of men who played with fire and didn't care who got burned. They don't want anyone to know what he did, she had said, her hands shaking as she grasped the edge of the table. And now they're coming for me. I don't know who else to trust. Father Brown had listened carefully. The pieces of the puzzle were already starting to form in his mind. There was always a clue, always a moment when everything clicked into place. But the woman before him wasn't just afraid for herself. She had the kind of fear that gnawed at a person from the inside, the kind of fear that made you look over your shoulder every time you heard footsteps behind you. I can help, he had said quietly, his voice like a balm to her nerves. But first, you need to trust me completely. Tell me everything. And now, here he was, standing on the slick, rain-drenched streets, following the trail she had left behind. The warehouse where she claimed her father had worked was only a few blocks away, down by the river where the city's filth seemed to gather. The buildings were old here, crumbling from years of neglect, their windows boarded up and their walls covered in layers of grime. It was a place that smelled of decay, both literal and metaphorical. Father Brown approached the building with a quiet certainty, his footsteps almost lost in the rumble of distant thunder. The warehouse loomed ahead, dark and silent, a hollow shell of what it once might have been. He could feel the weight of it, the weight of all the secrets buried within. As he entered, the door creaked on its hinges, the sound slicing through the silence like a knife. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mold and rust. The floors were covered in dust, the kind of dust that never quite settled, as if the place itself was too afraid to stand still. He moved through the shadows, his eyes scanning the room, alert to every creak and groan of the building. And then he saw it, a small figure in the corner, huddled in the darkness. Margaret. She looked up as he approached, her face pale and drawn. There was something desperate in her eyes now, something far more than just fear. It was the look of a person who knew they were running out of time. I didn't know who else to turn to, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They've been watching me, Father. They know I know too. Much. They won't stop until I'm gone. Father Brown nodded, his expression unreadable. Tell me, Margaret, what is it you think you know? What is it that they fear? Her eyes darted nervously around the room, as if the walls themselves might betray her. I know what happened to my father, she said, her voice cracking with the weight of her words. I know what they did to him. Father Brown's gaze softened, but his mind was already turning over the implications. What did they do? She hesitated for a moment, then swallowed hard, as if she were forcing herself to speak. He betrayed them, Father. He was part of a deal that went wrong, something to do with stolen goods. They caught him and made him disappear. But they didn't kill him, not right away. They used him to cover their tracks, to make sure no one would find out what they were really doing. And now they're using me the same way. They think I know where he hid the evidence. Father Brown's heart sank, but his face remained calm. This wasn't just a tale of a man gone missing. This was a story of manipulation, of lives bought and sold in the dark corners of the city. It was a story of betrayal that ran deeper than he had initially realized. You're not just running from them, Margaret, Father Brown said, his voice quiet but resolute. They've trapped you. They've made you part of their game, and now you have to break free. She looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. How? How can I escape this? Father Brown took a deep breath. The same way your father should have. By confronting the truth, they've kept you in the shadows for too long. It's time to bring everything into the light. Margaret looked up at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. But they'll kill me. They won't, Father Brown interrupted gently, because they need you. The moment you stop being useful to them is the moment they'll dispose of you. But as long as you hold on to the truth, as long as you understand what they've done, they'll never fully control you. She nodded slowly, but Father Brown could see the doubt in her eyes. What do I do now? Now, you let me handle it, he said, his voice calm. And when the time comes, you will be the one to reveal their lies. As they left the warehouse, Father Brown's thoughts were already turning. The pieces were falling into place, and he could see the larger picture now. Margaret wasn't just running from the people who had taken her father. She was running from a system built on lies, deceit, and the exploitation of those who were too weak to fight back. And it was time for that system to crumble. Father Brown was a man of faith, yes, but he knew that sometimes the truth wasn't a light that shone from above. Sometimes the truth was a weapon, a sharp edge that cut through the darkness and brought the guilty to justice. And tonight, that truth was going to set someone free. It was just a matter of making sure the right person was left standing when the dust settled. As they walked through the rain, the city around them seemed to quiet, the usual hum of traffic and distant voices fading into the background. Father Brown was used to the silence. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a silence that held all the weight of the secrets buried in this city. And as he walked, he knew the final twist was coming, the final revelation, the moment when all the lies would be exposed. But for now, he only had one thing on his mind, to make sure that for once the truth would have the last word. Chapter 5. The Smell of Bitter Coffee. The rain was a persistent force that night, a cold curtain of water that clung to the darkened streets of the city, leaving everything it touched slick and glistening, like the skin of a freshly caught fish. Father Brown walked through it with the ease of someone who had long ago made peace with the unrelenting weather. His collar was turned up against the damp, but the rain had already soaked his coat through, seeping into the folds of his clothes. Yet he didn't mind the cold. It was the kind of night that made you want to keep your head down and your heart in check. But Father Brown had no illusions about the city. He knew its heart was buried beneath layers of grime and rust, a heart full of secrets, sin, and sorrow. He had received the call earlier that afternoon, a request that came from an old acquaintance, a woman who had once been part of a parish he'd served in a decade ago. Her name was Clara Webb, and she hadn't changed much since their last meeting. Still the same sharp features, still the same calculating eyes that made you wonder just what went on behind them. He remembered her then as a woman who had never quite fit in with the world around her. She was too cold, too distant from the usual chatter of the people who came to Mass, the kind of woman who wanted to be seen but never understood. Her message had been brief but urgent. I need your help, Father. Meet me at my cafe. I can't talk over the phone. The cafe in question was tucked away in one of the less respectable corners of the city, where the neon signs flickered like dying fireflies and the hum of the nearby bars mixed with the thumping bass of nightclubs. It wasn't the kind of place you came to for a pleasant conversation or a peaceful moment with a cup of tea. The air was thick with the smell of bitter coffee, stale cigarettes, and wet wool, a smell that seemed to linger in the lungs of anyone who walked through the door. Father Brown stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room, noting the half-empty cups and the lingering faces of people whose lives had somehow slipped through the cracks. Clara was sitting in the corner booth, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her, as if she were preparing for an interrogation. She looked up as he approached, her eyes narrowing, but there was something else there now, a hardness that hadn't been there before. "Father Brown," she said, her voice smooth, almost too smooth. She was wearing a tailored coat, and the way she held herself made it clear she was someone who was used to being in control. "I didn't expect you to come." "Why wouldn't I?" Father Brown asked, sliding into the seat across from her. He wasn't intimidated by her cool exterior. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous people were often the ones who looked the least dangerous. "You said you needed help." Clara didn't answer immediately. She picked up her coffee cup, staring into it as if searching for something. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, more deliberate. "It's about my brother Thomas. He's missing." Father Brown raised an eyebrow. "Missing? But you've already told the police, haven't you?" "Of course," she said, her tone sharp now. "But they're useless. They won't help me. You're the only one who can." Father Brown folded his hands in front of him, his eyes never leaving Clara's. "I'm listening. Tell me, what happened?" Clara leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping the edge of her cup. "Thomas has been involved in things that aren't exactly legal, but he's my brother, father, and I love him. I never asked him to get involved in the kind of people he's been working with. I thought he was out, but now I'm not so sure." Father Brown didn't speak. He just watched her, letting her words settle in the air around them. He had learned that people rarely said what they meant the first time around, and he knew better than to rush them. "Who is he working with?" Father Brown asked, his voice soft but firm. Clara hesitated, her gaze shifting toward the door, as if checking for anyone listening. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," she muttered, "but he's tangled up with some very dangerous people who don't leave anything to chance. And now, Father, I think they've taken him." Father Brown sat back, his mind already sorting through the details. The dangerous people, the missing brother, the fear in Clara's voice, everything pointed towards something deeper. But the question was what? "Why come to me, Clara? If it's a matter of people like that, the police could—" "I don't trust the police," she interrupted, her voice suddenly bitter. "They're all in on it, Father. They know what's going on, but they don't care. My brother was doing something for them, something that crossed a line, and I'm afraid it's too late." Father Brown frowned, studying her face. "What do you mean by too late?" She swallowed hard, her hands gripping the edge of the table now. "I think they're going to kill him, Father, and they're going to make sure no one finds out. I know it sounds paranoid, but I'm sure of it." Father Brown thought for a moment, his fingers tapping the edge of the table, then leaned forward slightly. "Where do you think they've taken him?" "I don't know," Clara said, her voice trembling now, her bravado slipping. "I've been trying to find out. I've been to all the places he used to go, the places they hide their things, but nothing. It's like he's just disappeared. It's like they erased him." Father Brown sat back, his mind whirling with possibilities. There was something not right about all of this. Clara was terrified, yes, but there was something else in her eyes, something more than just the fear for her brother. It was the fear of being caught in a lie. But what was the lie? And why did she come to him instead of going to someone with more power, more muscle? He took a deep breath and looked at her with quiet resolve. "I will help you," he said. "But I need you to answer me honestly. What was your brother involved in?" Clara's eyes darted around the cafe before returning to his. "I don't know everything, Father. But I think he was working with the wrong people. People who can make someone disappear. People who make sure their business stays clean." Father Brown leaned in a little closer. "Did he owe them money?" Clara flinched. "I don't know." Father Brown raised an eyebrow. "Did he?" Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Yes." He nodded slowly, digesting this piece of information. Money. There was always money involved in these sorts of things, and when money was involved, people tended to disappear. Father Brown stood up from the table, smoothing out his coat. "I'll take a look around, but I'll need something more from you, Clara." She looked up at him, eyes wide. "What?" "Tell me who he was working with," Father Brown said. "Who's behind this? Who's pulling the strings?" Clara hesitated, then let out a sigh, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know their names, Father, but I know where they meet. I can take you there." Father Brown didn't flinch. He had heard the stories before, the seedy underbelly of the city, where the powerful hid behind the veil of shadows, their names lost to the wind. But Clara's fear wasn't just about her brother anymore. It was about her too, and the people who wanted to erase him weren't going to stop with just him. "Lead the way," Father Brown said, his voice calm but decisive. The night air hit him like a cold slap as they stepped out of the cafe, the rain falling harder now. Clara led him down dark alleyways, past run-down buildings that smelled of rot and decay. The city was alive with secrets, each street corner holding a story that someone didn't want told. They arrived at a building that seemed to hunch in the shadows, a place where the windows were blacked out, and the door looked like it had been kicked in more than once. The smell of stale smoke and dampness hung in the air as Clara led Father Brown inside, her footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. Inside, the place was dimly lit, with piles of boxes stacked haphazardly in every corner. There was a feeling of neglect here, like the people who used it had forgotten it even existed. Father Brown could feel the weight of the air, the weight of guilt and sin that clung to the walls. "You're sure this is where he was?" Father Brown asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara nodded, her face pale. "I've seen him here before. They meet here. Talk business." Father Brown stepped further inside, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the room. He didn't need to see the faces to know what kind of business was going on here. The stink of corruption was everywhere. And then he saw it, a small piece of paper sticking out from under a crate. He knelt down, pulling it free, and read the name written in a hurried scrawl. It meant nothing to him at first, but then he felt the pieces begin to click into place. He knew who was behind this. The people pulling the strings, hiding in the shadows, playing their dirty game. He stood up and looked at Clara. "Your brother's involvement in all this wasn't a coincidence," he said quietly. "He didn't just owe them money. He was part of something much bigger than you thought." Clara's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "They're using him," Father Brown said, his voice heavy with the weight of the truth. "And now they're going to use you too." And just like that, The game was no longer about finding a missing brother. It was about survival and finding a way out of the darkness that had trapped them all. Chapter 6. Secrets Beneath the Floorboards. The rain hammered the streets like a drumbeat, relentless and unforgiving. It turned the city's grimy streets into rivers of slush, washing away the day's sins, but leaving behind only a sharper sense of isolation. Father Brown stepped out from the shelter of the church, his collar turned up against the wet, his steps slow and deliberate as he made his way through the slick alleyways. The streetlights flickered, their neon glow casting long, warped shadows that seemed to stretch out from the corners like hungry fingers. It had been a day like any other in the city, filled with rumors, whispers, and the kind of trouble that clung to people like smoke. The phone call had come just as the sun dipped beneath the horizon, and a voice on the other end had simply said, "Meet me at the cafe on 4th. There's a problem." Father Brown had heard that line more times than he cared to admit. He had learned that people who lived in places like this never asked for help unless they were desperate, and when they were desperate, they often hid more than they were willing to admit. The cafe was small, tucked between a pair of crumbling buildings. Inside, it was just as Father Brown remembered it: stale coffee, dim lighting, and the faint scent of cigarette smoke that never quite left the air. It was the kind of place where conversations were held in whispers and secrets traded like currency. At the far corner of the cafe, a woman sat alone, her face hidden behind a veil of shadows. Father Brown's eyes lingered on her for a moment before he made his way over. He had known her once, in a way. Her name was Lillian Turner, and she had once come to him for guidance many years ago when things seemed simpler. Back then, she had been fresh-faced and naive, but now, as he looked at her, there was nothing but coldness in her eyes, a coldness that told him there was something more to this meeting than just a simple confession. "You're late," she said, as he took a seat across from her, her voice a soft, calculating whisper. "Time doesn't matter," Father Brown replied calmly, his hands folded in front of him. "What matters is why you're here." Lillian leaned forward slightly, her lips curling into a tight smile. "I need your help, Father. But I need you to promise me something first." Father Brown raised an eyebrow, his gaze never wavering. "And what's that?" She hesitated, glancing around the room before she continued. "I need you to keep your nose out of things that don't concern you. There's a lot at stake here." Father Brown didn't react. He had learned long ago not to be rushed, to let the silence between words do the work. People always filled it with things they didn't intend to say. "I'm listening," he said. Lillian shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of her coffee cup. "It's my husband Charles," she said, her voice tight with something like fear. He's gone missing." Father Brown waited for her to continue, but she didn't. Instead, she stared at the table in front of her, as if trying to decide whether or not to trust him with the truth. It was a familiar game, and Father Brown had played it more times than he could count. "He's been gone for 2 days, she said finally, her eyes still avoiding his. "No one knows where he is, and I've looked everywhere. I've called the police, but they aren't doing anything. They say it's too early to start a search, but I know something's wrong." Father Brown's eyes softened, but there was a sharpness behind them that told her he wasn't buying the whole story. "Why do you think they aren't helping you?" Lillian's gaze flickered toward the door, as if she expected someone to burst in at any moment. Because the police are bought, it's all a game to them. Charles got involved with some people, father, people who don't like to be crossed, and now he's gone. Father Brown considered this for a moment. What kind of people? The kind who own this city, Lillian said, her voice barely above a whisper. The kind who can make you disappear without anyone asking questions. They have connections, power. They make things go away. And I think Charles knew too much. Father Brown studied her face for a long moment, then leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping rhythmically on the edge of the table. "Tell me everything," he said quietly. "Don't leave anything out." Lillian's eyes flickered with something, guilt perhaps, but she nodded and began to speak, her words tumbling out in a rush. She told him about Charles's involvement with a group of wealthy businessmen who had ties to organized crime. She spoke of shady deals, of money laundered through front companies, of secrets buried deep beneath layers of corruption. It was the kind of story Father Brown had heard before. But this time, there was something more to it. Something dark. She paused, taking a breath. "I know he was getting out, Father. He promised me he was done with it. But now I think they're using me to get to him. They think I know something." Father Brown studied her face, his gaze sharp and unflinching. "What do they think you know?" Lillian looked away, her fingers trembling slightly. "I don't know," she whispered, "but they won't stop until they find out, and if they don't find him, they'll come for me next." Father Brown's mind raced, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. This wasn't just a simple case of a missing person. It was a game of power, of corruption, and of fear. Charles Turner had made enemies, and now his enemies had made Lillian their target. "I'll help you," Father Brown said, his voice quiet but firm. "But you need to trust me completely." Lillian nodded, her face pale and drawn. "I will, but I don't know what else to do." Father Brown stood up slowly, his coat billowing slightly as he moved toward the door. "The truth is buried somewhere, Lillian, but I have a feeling it's not too far beneath the surface. If you want to find your husband, you'll need to dig deeper." She followed him to the door, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Where will you start?" Father Brown didn't answer right away. He was already formulating a plan in his mind. "I'll start by finding out who's been lying to you." The city outside was cold and wet, the streets slick with rain that reflected the harsh glow of neon lights. Father Brown walked down the sidewalk, his mind racing with the implications of what Lillian had told him. There was more to this than a simple disappearance. There was something much darker at work. He had seen it before, the way power twisted people's hearts, the way greed turned even the most honest men into criminals. But what troubled him most was the nagging feeling that he wasn't being told the whole truth. He knew where to start, at the bottom, always at the bottom, where the dirt and the secrets lay buried. Father Brown made his way to a rundown building on the edge of town, a place where the air always smelled like oil and rust. It was here, in the forgotten corners of the city, where the real deals were made, where the criminals lived without fear of being caught. The building was dark, the windows grimy and cracked. It had the look of a place where people went to do things they didn't want anyone to know about. Father Brown knocked on the door, his knock calm but insistent. A moment later, the door creaked open, revealing a man who looked like he had seen far too many years of crime and corruption. His face was hard, his eyes cold, but there was a flicker of recognition when he saw Father Brown. "What do you want, Father?" the man grunted, his voice rough from years of smoking and drinking. Father Brown didn't flinch. He knew the man's type, tough on the outside, but with a fear buried deep inside. "I'm looking for Charles Turner," Father Brown said, his voice steady. The man's eyes flickered with something, surprise maybe, or guilt. "You're wasting your time," he said, his voice lowering. "He's gone. You're not going to find him." Father Brown didn't move. "Where is he?" The man hesitated, his hand tightening on the doorframe. "I don't know," he muttered. "But I know he's in trouble, big trouble, and you don't want to get involved in this, Father. Trust me." Father Brown didn't flinch. "I'm already involved." The man stepped back, opening the door slightly wider. "Come inside," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Inside, the room was dimly lit, the air thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of stale alcohol. The man led Father Brown to a table cluttered with papers and half-empty bottles. There were no windows in the room, only the faint light from a single, flickering bulb overhead. "He was working for the wrong people," the man said, his voice tense. "Big money, big risk. And he tried to get out, but they don't let people like him walk away." Father Brown watched the man closely, his eyes sharp. "Who are they?" The man swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the corners of the room. "You don't want to know," he muttered. "But I'll tell you this. If you're looking for Turner, you're looking for trouble." Father Brown's expression didn't change. "Where is he?" The man finally cracked, his shoulders slumping. "There's a place, an old warehouse by the docks. It's where they keep people like him. They've got him there, Father. And if you don't hurry, you'll never see him again." Father Brown nodded, his mind already working. He had the answer, but there was something more to this. Something hidden beneath the surface. Something that needed to be uncovered. But for now, he had one thing on his mind: finding Charles Turner before it was too late. And so, he set out into the night, the smell of bitter coffee still lingering in his mind, knowing that whatever happened next would reveal the secrets buried deep beneath the floorboards of this city. Chapter 7. A Kiss of Poison in the Dark. The city had a smell to it that night, thick and metallic, like blood and iron. The rain was heavy, coming down in torrents, but the streets were still slick with the weight of things better left unsaid. Father Brown walked through the slick alleyways, his collar pulled up against the cold, the hem of his coat brushing the wet pavement with each deliberate step. His mind wasn't on the rain, or the gloom, or the city that seemed to be slowly devouring itself. It was on the call he had received earlier that evening, a desperate voice on the other end of the line, pleading for help in a way that left no room for doubt. Something was very wrong. He had arrived at the address in the dead of night, the usual hum of the city muffled by the rain. A small apartment building on the outskirts of downtown, tucked between a dilapidated bar and a strip of vacant stores. The lights in the building were dim, and the door to apartment 3B had been slightly ajar. Father Brown had knocked once, twice, and then pushed it open. Inside, he found a woman sitting at a small round table by the window, her face illuminated only by the pale, flickering light of a cigarette she held loosely between her fingers. She didn't look up as he entered. She didn't seem startled, but then again, she had probably been waiting for him. The desperation in her voice had been unmistakable, but the air in the room now was thick with something else, something darker. "You're Father Brown," she said, her voice a soft rasp that made the air seem thicker. "I've heard about you." Father Brown remained silent, watching her carefully. Her name was Evelyn Hargrave, and she was not what he had expected. She was tall, sharp-featured, with eyes that looked like they had seen too much, and were tired of seeing any more. There was something in the way she sat, the way she held herself, that reminded Father Brown of a coiled spring, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. "I'm here to help," he said softly, his voice calm, almost too calm for a world that was anything but. Evelyn took a long drag from her cigarette, her eyes lingering on him for a moment longer before she spoke again, her voice steady but strained. "My husband's dead," she said simply, as though it were a statement of fact and not a tragedy. Father Brown stepped further into the room, letting the door close behind him with a soft click. He could feel the weight of the city pressing in on him, but he didn't let it show. "How did he die?" he asked quietly, his eyes never leaving hers. "A heart attack," she replied without hesitation. "That's what they'll tell you, Father. That's what they'll tell everyone." Father Brown didn't respond right away. He was used to people lying, even when the truth was staring them in the face. But there was something about Evelyn's calmness, the way she spoke, that told him she was hiding something deeper than grief. "And what do you think happened?" Father Brown asked, his voice low but insistent. Her eyes flickered for just a moment, and then she exhaled slowly, her cigarette smoke curling up into the air like a whispered confession. "I think someone killed him," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Someone poisoned him." Father Brown watched her closely. "Poison?" Evelyn nodded, her hands trembling slightly as she placed the cigarette in the ashtray. "I found something strange in his medicine cabinet, something that didn't belong." Father Brown remained silent, waiting for her to continue. But Evelyn didn't speak immediately. Instead, she sat there for a moment, her eyes focused on the table in front of her, as if the answer was written there. Then, as if she could no longer hold it in, she finally looked up at him. "He wasn't always the man he seemed," she said, her voice heavy with something Father Brown couldn't quite place. "I married him thinking I was getting a good man, someone who would protect me. But after a while, I realized he was involved with people who were dangerous." Father Brown's expression didn't change. He had heard stories like this before, stories of husbands and wives, good and bad, lost in the murky waters of crime and corruption. It wasn't anything new. What mattered now was why she was here, why she had called him. "Who was he involved with?" Father Brown asked, his voice quiet but steady. Evelyn paused, her lips trembling as she tried to find the words. "I don't know the details," she said, her voice shaking slightly, "but I know that his work was dangerous, and I know that it caught up with him. He wasn't the man I thought he was, Father, but I never thought someone would actually kill him." Father Brown listened, his mind piecing together the clues. Evelyn's fear was genuine, that much he could tell. But there was more to this than just a poisoned husband. There was a story here, a story that went deeper than Evelyn's grief, deeper than the surface of her calm demeanor. "Who would want to kill him?" Father Brown asked, his voice soft but insistent. Evelyn's eyes flickered for a moment, and she opened her mouth to speak. But then she stopped herself, her gaze darting toward the door, as if she had heard something she wasn't supposed to. Father Brown stood still, his expression unchanged. He could feel the tension in the room, the slow build of unease, and he knew that whatever she wasn't saying was the key to everything. "Evelyn," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. Who was he involved with? Her eyes widened for a moment, and then she lowered her gaze to the floor. For a brief second, Father Brown thought she might crumble under the weight of the question. But then she took a deep breath and met his gaze again. "The police," she said simply. "The same people who say it was a heart attack. They're all in on it. My husband was in deep, Father. He got involved with them, with the cops who are in the pocket of the city's most dangerous criminals." Father Brown's expression hardened slightly, his mind turning over the implications of what she had said. Corrupt cops, powerful criminals, the poison, the murder, the lies. It was all coming together. "What do you want me to do?" Father Brown asked. Evelyn's eyes locked onto his. "I want you to find the truth. I want you to find out who did this." Father Brown nodded slowly. "I will. But first, I need to know everything. The people your husband was involved with, what he was doing, and where he might have gone after. Whatever happened to him." Evelyn hesitated, her face pale. "He never spoke about it," she said, almost pleading. "He told me to stay out of it, but I know he was involved with a group. He never told me their names, Father, but I think they're the ones who poisoned him. They're the ones who killed him." Father Brown stood up, his mind already working through the tangled mess of clues. He knew that this wasn't going to be simple. It never was. The truth was hidden in layers, and it would take more than just asking questions to uncover it. But Father Brown wasn't afraid of the dark. He had spent his life walking through shadows, and if anyone could find the light, it was him. "I'll find out who did this," Father Brown said, his voice steady. "But I need you to stay out of it, Evelyn. Stay out of the way while I work." She looked up at him, her eyes filled with desperation. "But how can I? My husband is dead. I need justice." Father Brown's eyes softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. "Justice will come, but not if you try to take it on yourself. Leave it to me." Evelyn nodded slowly, her shoulders slumping, with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Father Brown stepped out into the rain-soaked streets once more, the cool night air biting at his skin. He had a feeling this would lead him down a path darker than anything he had ever encountered. But that was the nature of the city. It thrived on darkness, on the secrets people tried to bury beneath the surface. And for a moment, he thought he could almost hear the echo of his own voice, whispering back to him from the shadows. The truth will always find a way. But it wasn't just the truth Father Brown sought. It was something deeper, something that lay hidden beneath the surface, something that had been poisoned long before Evelyn's husband had ever taken his last breath. And whatever it was, he was going to find it. The rain fell harder, and the city seemed to swallow everything whole. But Father Brown didn't mind. He had seen this before. The darkness had always been there, waiting to be uncovered. And he would be the one to uncover it, one secret at a time. Chapter 8. The Man Who Wasn't There. The rain had started up again, the kind of rain that soaked through your coat and made your bones feel cold. The city had a way of looking different when it rained, the streets slick and gleaming under the flickering neon lights, shadows creeping in all the wrong places. Father Brown wasn't bothered by the rain. It was the least of his concerns. He had lived through worse storms than this, storms that tore at your soul, and not just your clothing. Tonight, the storm felt like it was inside the city, the way the alleyways seemed darker, the faces in the crowd seemed thinner, and the air had that particular kind of stale weight that came just before something broke. He had been summoned to another case, a call from a woman desperate for help. The kind of woman who wasn't afraid to ask for it, but didn't always want the truth when she got it. Her name was Alice Trevors, and she was a woman who hadn't quite fit the mold. She was tall, her hair a mess of curls that she tucked behind her ears as if they would stop betraying her. Her eyes were sharp, but there was a glint of something in them, a hesitation, as if she had walked into a room she had no business being in. It was a look Father Brown had seen before, in people who were caught in webs of their own making. The call had been simple enough. "Father, I need your help. There's a man who disappeared, and I need to know where he's gone." The voice on the other end of the line had been shaky, but not from fear, more from frustration. When Father Brown arrived at the address, a dilapidated building on the corner of an industrial block, the neon signs around it blinked in and out of life, like the city itself was trying to find some sort of meaning. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and cheap perfume, and Alice sat alone at a table near the window, her fingers tapping anxiously against the glass. "Father," she said, without looking up, her voice distant, as if she were somewhere else entirely. "You came." Father Brown sat down opposite her, his eyes scanning the room before resting on her face. "I came because you asked me to," he said quietly, "but I have a feeling you're hiding something from me." Alice finally looked up, her eyes meeting his. There was a flicker of recognition, but then it was gone, replaced by something colder. "I didn't know who else to turn to," she said, her words clipped, precise. "I know what kind of man you are, Father. You're not like the others. You can help me." "I can help," Father Brown said slowly, "but only if you tell me the whole story. The truth, Alice, the whole truth." She exhaled sharply, her shoulders sagging as she leaned back in her chair. "His name was Jack Barnes. He worked for a company, but it wasn't just any company, Father. He was mixed up with people who were dangerous, people who made sure that nothing got in the way of their money. Jack was the kind of man who'd do anything to stay out of trouble, but I think he got in over his head." Father Brown studied her carefully. "What happened to him?" Alice looked down, her fingers twisting in the folds of her dress. "He disappeared. One day, he was just gone. No note, no trace. I thought he was just trying to get away from me. He was scared of something, Father. But then I found out something that made me think he was more than just running away. Someone had taken him, someone with connections." Father Brown's gaze never wavered. "You're sure it wasn't just a simple disappearance? A man running from his life?" Alice shook her head, her expression darkening. "No. I know he's not just hiding. Someone took him. I know because I found this," she said, pulling an envelope from her bag and placing it on the table. Father Brown opened the envelope, his eyes scanning the letter inside. It was short, cryptic, just a few words scrawled across a sheet of paper. It wasn't the kind of thing that made any sense on its own. Just a name, an address, and a final, haunting sentence. "He knows too much. He's gone now." Father Brown's face remained unreadable as he folded the paper back up and returned it to the envelope. "And you think this is from the people who took him?" Alice nodded, her face pale. "I know it is. I've seen that name before. I don't know who they are, but I know they've been following Jack for months." Father Brown sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the table, as he thought. He had seen this kind of thing before. People getting tangled up in things they didn't fully understand, falling victim to the machinery of forces that played with lives like chess pieces. It was always the same. A person wanted something, took something, and then someone else had to pay the price for it. "You don't trust the police," Father Brown said, his voice calm but pointed. Alice's eyes flickered with something darker. "They're all in on it. They don't care. They've been paid off, Father. You can't trust them." Father Brown nodded, absorbing the weight of her words. "So you want me to find Jack? To find out who took him?" "Yes," Alice said, her voice barely a whisper now. "But there's one more thing." Father Brown waited, his expression steady, but his mind already turning over the possibilities. "What is it?" "I think Jack is still alive," she said, her voice trembling. "I think he's being held somewhere, and I think he's still trying to send me a message." Father Brown studied her face, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Why would he send you a message if he was in danger?" Alice took a deep breath, the air catching in her chest. "Because I know something he didn't want me to know. He was trying to protect me from it, protect me from the people he got involved with. But he couldn't keep me safe anymore. And now, I'm afraid, they'll come after me too." Father Brown thought for a moment before standing up. "I'll help you, Alice. But first, you need to be honest with me. Everything. What did Jack do that made him a target?" Her face crumpled, and for the first time, Father Brown saw the weight of her fear. "He got too close," she said, her voice barely audible. "He was working for a company, yes. But the company was a front. It was really a way for them to get their hands on anything they wanted. Money, power, anything. And Jack found out something that made him a liability." Father Brown's gaze sharpened. "What did he find out?" "I don't know exactly," Alice whispered, "but I know it had to do with something illegal, something big." Father Brown nodded slowly, his thoughts turning over the details. "And now they're trying to silence him." Alice nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Please, Father, I don't know what else to do." Father Brown took a deep breath and turned toward the door. "I'll find him," he said quietly, "but I need to start at the beginning. I need to find out who Jack was working for and who these people really are." The rain had slowed to a soft drizzle by the time Father Brown stepped outside. The streets were quieter now, the city's pulse a low, constant hum in the background. But the quiet was deceptive. There was a storm brewing in the air, a storm that would unravel everything in its path. Father Brown made his way to the wall, address written on the paper, his mind already turning over the possibilities. He knew what was at stake here, more than just a missing man. This was a case of power, of corruption, and of things far darker than he had yet discovered. When he reached the address, he found an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The doors were locked, the windows boarded up, but there was a sense of unease in the air, as if something was waiting inside. Father Brown didn't hesitate. He walked around the building, his eyes scanning the perimeter, until he found a side door, slightly ajar. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of stale air. Father Brown's eyes adjusted quickly to the dim light, and he moved through the space quietly, his steps almost soundless on the creaking floorboards. The place felt abandoned, but there was something off about it, something that didn't sit right. As he moved further into the building, he noticed a faint trail of footprints leading to the back. They were fresh, the marks still visible in the dust. He followed them, his steps slow but deliberate. And then, as he turned a corner, he saw something that made his stomach drop. There, in the far corner of the room, was a man a man who looked like he had been tossed aside like a rag doll. His clothes were torn, his face bruised, but there was something familiar about him. Father Brown moved closer, and as the man's face came into view, he recognized him. It was Jack. But Jack wasn't dead. Not yet. He was still breathing, though barely, his eyes flickering open as Father Brown knelt beside him. "Jack," Father Brown said softly, "you're safe now. We'll get you out of here." Jack's eyes flickered toward him, and for a moment, Father Brown saw something more than just fear. There was relief in his eyes, but also something else. Something that hadn't been there before. A look of resignation. "They knew too much," Jack whispered hoarsely, his voice barely a breath. "They had to silence me." And with that, Jack closed his eyes, his body going still. Father Brown stood up slowly, his heart heavy with the weight of the truth. It wasn't just crime that had brought them here. It was sin. Deep, dark, unrepentant sin. The kind that consumed everything it touched. And in the end, it had claimed Jack, just as it had claimed everyone else who got too close. Father Brown turned and walked out of the warehouse, the rain still falling softly around him. The city was quieter now, but Father Brown knew it wasn't done with him yet. The storm was still coming, and he would be ready for it. Chapter 9. The Bell That Didn't Ring. The city was a slow-moving beast, thick with rain and heavy with secrets. It was the kind of place where the air tasted like rust, and the buildings loomed like forgotten monuments to a better past. The streets were slick with water, and the neon lights cast a sickly glow on the asphalt, flickering like they had no interest in sticking around for long. Father Brown walked through it all like he didn't belong, his black coat trailing behind him, his step steady, his mind elsewhere. The night was unusually quiet, as if the city itself was holding its breath. The kind of quiet that made a man uneasy, the kind of quiet that meant trouble was just around the corner. Father Brown didn't mind the quiet. He was used to it. There was a certain peace in knowing that no matter how loud the world around you got, the answers always lived in the silence. He had been summoned by a woman named Sarah Martin, someone who had been in his confessional once or twice over the years, but tonight, her voice on the other end of the line had been filled with a sense of urgency that had driven Father Brown out into the rain-soaked streets. She had spoken of a man, her husband no less, who had vanished without a trace. But the odd part was that she hadn't asked for the usual police intervention. Instead, she had begged him to come alone, to meet her in a place that felt a little too much like a trap. Father Brown had learned long ago that when people ask you to come alone, it's rarely because they trust you. It's because they need something from you, something they can't explain over the phone. The address was a small church on the edge of town, nestled in between a couple of disreputable buildings. The kind of place no one bothered to visit anymore. The bell tower loomed overhead, but the bell didn't ring anymore. That, too, was fitting. He stepped through the doors into the dim interior, the sound of his footsteps echoing off the stone floors. The air was stale, thick with the smell of incense that had long since lost its potency. It was as if the church had given up on itself. The pews were empty, save for one figure sitting near the altar. She was staring ahead, her face obscured by the shadows, her back rigid. "Father Brown," she said, her voice low but sharp, like a knife cutting through the silence. "I'm glad you came." Father Brown's eyes flicked over her carefully. She was slender, her face still youthful, though her eyes seemed older than the rest of her. There was a tiredness to her, a kind of weariness that told him she hadn't been sleeping well. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, as though holding onto something that might slip away if she wasn't careful. "I was afraid you wouldn't," she continued, her voice betraying a hint of desperation. "It's about Peter." My husband, Father Brown, sat across from her, the cold stone pressing against the weight of his thoughts. "What happened to him?" he asked, his voice even, but with an edge of concern. Sarah's hands tightened, her knuckles pale under the strain. "He's gone," she said simply. "Vanished. Disappeared without a trace. And I know who did it." Father Brown waited, his gaze steady. "You know who did it," he repeated, the words sounding more like a question than a statement. She nodded, her eyes flickering toward the door, as though she feared someone might be listening. "Yes, but I can't prove it. And if I go to the police, they won't believe me." Father Brown studied her for a long moment. "Who do you think did it?" "The Bellamy family," she said, her voice tight. "They're powerful people, wealthy, and they don't take kindly to anyone who gets in their way." Father Brown had heard of the Bellamys. They were well known in the city, but not for the kind of reasons one would be proud of. They ran their businesses with an iron fist, and their influence stretched far and wide. In a city like this, power came in different shapes, and the Bellamys had been one of its darker forms. "You think they took Peter?" Father Brown asked, his voice calm but probing. Sarah's lips tightened into a thin line. "I know they did. Peter. He got too close to something, too close to their operations. They found out, and now he's gone. And I don't think they plan to let him go." Father Brown nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of her words. "Tell me more," he said, his voice gentle but insistent. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "Peter was working with a man named Frank Rizzo. Frank was trying to expose the Bellamys for what they really are, everything they've done, all the shady deals, the corruption. Peter got pulled into it by accident. He thought he was helping, but it was too late by the time he realized what was going on. And now Frank's disappeared too. I think the Bellamys have him, and I think they've done the same to Peter." Father Brown absorbed the information quietly, his gaze never leaving her face. He had seen enough to know when someone was lying, and Sarah's fear felt genuine. But there was something else in the way she spoke, something that didn't quite add up. People in this city didn't just disappear, not without leaving a trail behind. And if the Bellamys were involved, there would be more to the story than just kidnapping. "Do you have any proof?" Father Brown asked, his voice soft. Sarah shook her head. "No, just my suspicions, and the fact that no one is looking for Peter. No one but me. The police won't even file a report. They're in on it, Father. I'm telling you, they're all in on it." Father Brown didn't respond immediately. He stood up and walked to the back of the church, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He could feel the weight of Sarah's words pressing on him, the feeling that something was very wrong here. But he also knew that when people spoke in half-truths, they often left out the most important details. There was something Sarah wasn't telling him. "You said Peter was involved with Frank Rizzo," Father Brown said, his voice steady. "What do you know about Rizzo?" Sarah's face tightened, and for the first time, Father Brown saw the fear in her eyes. "I don't know much about him, only what Peter told me. But Frank was dangerous. He wasn't afraid to cross lines. He was trying to bring down the Bellamys. I think he knew too much." Father Brown turned back to face her, his expression unreadable. And Peter? Was he trying to bring them down too? Sarah looked away. No, not at first, but Peter got caught up in it. He started digging, asking questions. He thought he could make a difference, but he didn't realize how deep it went. The Bellamys have their hands in everything. Every business, every politician. Peter, he didn't stand a chance. Father Brown nodded slowly, his mind working through the details. This wasn't just a case of a missing man. It was a case of power, of fear, and of something much darker than he had been led to believe. The Bellamys weren't just criminals. They were the kind of people who could destroy lives without ever getting their hands dirty. "I'll look into it," Father Brown said, his voice calm. "But I need you to stay out of it. You're too close to this. I'll find out what happened to Peter, but you can't keep running. You're only putting yourself in more danger." Sarah's eyes flashed with something. Defiance, perhaps, or the last remnants of a fight she had lost a long time ago. "I can't just sit here and wait," she said. "I need to know what happened to him." Father Brown placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice steady but firm. "And you will. But not like this. Not by putting yourself in harm's way. I will find the truth. Trust me." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then finally, she nodded. "All right. I'll stay out of it. But please, Father, find him. Bring him back." Father Brown left the church, the door closing behind him with a soft click. The rain had started to pick up again, the streets glistening in the wet light. But as he walked down the empty street, a sense of unease crept over him. Something about this case didn't sit right. The Bellamys, the police, the missing men. There was a web here, a web of lies and deceit, and the truth was tangled deep inside it. He knew where to start, but he also knew it wouldn't be easy. In a city like this, the answers never came easy. They were buried beneath layers of corruption, wrapped up in the darkness that clung to the streets. But Father Brown had always known that the truth had a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deep it was buried. And this time, the truth was waiting for him. He just had to find it before it was buried for good. Chapter 10. A dying whisper in the alley. The city had a way of holding on to its secrets, like a thief gripping a stolen wallet. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, washing the grime off the streets, but it only made the city feel colder, dirtier, more forgotten. Father Brown walked through it, his steps slow, deliberate, each footfall muted by the wet pavement. The neon signs flickered above him, casting erratic flashes of sickly color on the rain-slicked streets, while the alleyways whispered their own stories, stories of lost souls and forgotten promises. Tonight, he wasn't just walking to clear his mind or find solace in the rhythm of the rain. He had been called to another one of those cases, the kind that always seemed to find him. A woman, her name was Louise, a woman who seemed as if she had been carved from the darkness itself. She had asked for him specifically, though she hadn't said why, only that she needed him, and that whatever had happened to her had something to do with a man who had gone missing. Father Brown wasn't a detective in the typical sense. He didn't chase criminals or flash badges. He didn't rely on fists or weapons. His weapon was his mind, his ability to sift through the lies people told, the guilt they buried under layers of pride and fear. His insight was his strength, his understanding of human nature. The good, the bad, and the ugly was his way of bringing light to a city that thrived in darkness. When He had arrived at the address Louise had given him. He found himself in a dilapidated building, the kind that had once been something more, but now served as a sad reminder of a better time. The door creaked open as he entered, the musty scent of old wood and mildew filling his nostrils. Louise was waiting for him, standing near a window, her back to him as she gazed out into the night. "You came," she said softly, not turning around. "I always come when someone needs help," Father Brown replied, his voice gentle but firm. He wasn't sure yet what she wanted, but he knew it was something more than just a missing person. She turned slowly, her face pale in the dim light. There was something about her, something that made Father Brown feel the weight of the city pressing down on him even more. It wasn't just her beauty, though she had that, a kind of dangerous elegance that was more unsettling than alluring. It was the look in her eyes, something desperate, something hungry. It was the kind of look that said she had seen too much and had no idea how to escape it. "Father Brown," she said, her voice trembling just slightly, "you have to help me. It's about my husband Michael." Father Brown folded his hands in front of him, studying her. "What happened to him?" he asked, his voice calm, but his mind already turning over the possibilities. Louise walked toward him, her heels clicking softly against the floor. "He's gone," she said, her voice tight, with emotion. "Vanished. No word. No trace. It's like he was swallowed by the night." "Tell me more," Father Brown said, his voice still steady. "When did this happen?" "2 nights ago," she said, her eyes flickering with something that could have been fear. "I woke up to find the bed empty. His things, his wallet, his coat, gone. It's like he just stepped out, and then nothing." Father Brown nodded, his brow furrowing slightly. He had seen cases like this before. People went missing all the time in cities like this, lost to the darkness, to bad choices, to the hands of the powerful and corrupt. But there was something in Louise's voice that told him this wasn't just another case of a man running away from his life. "And you don't think he just left?" Father Brown asked, his eyes never leaving hers. She shook her head quickly, almost violently. "No, Michael would never do that. Not to me, not to anyone. He's different. He's a good man. Father, he wouldn't just walk away." Father Brown didn't respond immediately. He was used to people's emotions clouding their judgment, especially when it came to someone they loved. But something about the way Louise spoke, so sure, so desperate, told him that her fear was more than just worry. It was something deeper, something she wasn't saying. "Who else knew about this?" he asked, his tone gentle but probing. "The police," she said bitterly, as if the words tasted like ash in her mouth. "They've been no help. They think he just left. They won't look into it. And the people he worked with, they're not saying anything either." Father Brown raised an eyebrow. "And who did he work for?" Louise hesitated, a flicker of something passing over her face, something that might have been guilt. "He worked for a man named Vincent Delacroix, a businessman, a big one, Father. But I don't think he's just a businessman. I think he's involved in things that aren't legal." Father Brown nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing slightly. "And you think Delacroix is involved in your husband's disappearance?" "I don't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But Michael got close to something. He found something out. And I think it cost him his life. I think they took him, Father. They took him because he knew too much." Father Brown stood silently for a moment, his eyes scanning the room, as if looking for some clue he hadn't yet seen. The rain continued to beat against the windows, a soft but persistent reminder of the world outside. But inside, there was only the silence, thick and suffocating. "What do you know about Delacroix?" Father Brown asked, his voice even. She hesitated, her hands wringing together as if the answer was too heavy for her to bear. "I don't know much, only that he's powerful. He owns most of the city. Hotels, bars, businesses. Everyone's in his pocket, Father. The cops, the judges, the politicians, everyone. And Michael. Michael got too close to something he shouldn't have. I think he found out about Delacroix's real business. And when he did, that's when they came for him." Father Brown felt the weight of her words settle around him like a fog. Power, corruption, people being swallowed by the system they created. It was all too familiar. He had seen it before, in different forms, in different places, but each time it left the same taste in his mouth, the taste of something rotten, something that had been festering for too long. "I'll help you," Father Brown said softly, his voice steady. "But I need to know everything, every detail, even the ones you're afraid to say." Louise hesitated again, her eyes flickering toward the door, as if checking to make sure no one was listening. "I've been to Delacroix's office," she whispered, her voice low. "I found something there. A letter. It was in Michael's desk. He must have left it there before he disappeared." Father Brown raised an eyebrow. "A letter? What did it say?" "I don't know," she said, her hands trembling again. "I couldn't make sense of it. It was all in code, but I know it was about something important, something that Delacroix didn't want anyone to find out." Father Brown's mind began to race. A letter in code? Something hidden? He had seen similar cases before, cases where people had tried to cover their tracks, to hide the truth beneath layers of deception. And each time, the truth came out, though not without cost. "We'll find it," Father Brown said, his voice firm now, no trace of doubt in it. "We'll find the letter. But you need to be careful, Louise. People like Delacroix don't like to be crossed. And they won't stop until they get what they want." She nodded, her face pale, but her resolve hardening. "I don't care anymore. I just want to find Michael. I want to know what happened to him." Father Brown turned and walked toward the door. He knew what he had to do next. It wasn't just about finding the missing man. It was about uncovering the truth. And in a city like this, the truth was always buried deep beneath the surface, hidden in the darkest corners, behind lies and blood. As Father Brown stepped out into the rain, the cold mist wrapping around him like a shroud, he could feel the weight of it all pressing down on him. The lies, the corruption, the people who had been swallowed by the darkness they had created. But the city had its secrets, and Father Brown was determined to uncover every last one of them. The bell in the church tower didn't ring anymore, but Father Brown didn't need it to. He had his own way of finding the truth, and it was only a matter of time before it all came to light. Chapter 11. The Thief Who Loved the Light. The rain had started again, not that it had ever stopped. In this part of the city, the wetness never went away, and neither did the gloom. It was a city of half-lights and half-truths, where shadows stretched long and thick down the alleys, and the only people you could trust were the ones who'd lived here too long to care. Father Brown was one of the few people who hadn't grown numb to it. He didn't look for the darkness in the city. He let it come to him. Tonight was one of those nights, the kind of night that felt like it was pressing in on you, making it hard to breathe. It was the kind of night that brought the old ones out, the ones who knew how to disappear into the cracks in the pavement. The city was still, but there was something brewing under that stillness. A buzz, a whisper of a crime that hadn't happened yet, but was inevitable. Father Brown had been called to another one of those cases, the kind that had a way of finding him even when he didn't seek them. The call came from a woman named Marissa Lyle, a name that was already too familiar. He had seen her at church, maybe a year ago, sitting in the back pew, her face always obscured by the shadows. Her life wasn't one of quiet faith, but rather one of careful calculations. Her eyes always seemed to be studying the people around her, as if weighing the worth of every soul that passed through. She had the kind of beauty that wasn't obvious, but came with a depth that made you wonder what secrets she kept behind her perfectly manicured exterior. Marissa was a thief, and she didn't want to be caught. The rain hit the windows of the small bar where Father Brown found her. She sat in a corner booth, her fingers wrapped around a glass of scotch, the amber liquid catching the flicker of the neon lights outside. She didn't look up when Father Brown entered, but he could feel her attention shift as soon as he stepped through the door. There was no need for pleasantries. They both knew why he was there. The only question was how much she would tell him. "Father," she said, her voice smooth, almost too smooth. "I'm glad you came." Father Brown didn't respond immediately. He wasn't here to exchange pleasantries, and he didn't intend to spend time on words that didn't matter. "You called me," he said softly, settling into the seat across from her. His eyes met hers, steady and unflinching. She raised her glass and took a sip before setting it down again, her fingers lingering on the edge. "I need your help," she said, and there was the faintest tremor in her voice, a crack in the otherwise composed surface. "Someone has stolen something from me, Father. Something very important." Father Brown folded his hands in front of him, watching her carefully. He had known too many people who lied, and just as many who believed their own lies. But with Marissa, it was something different. It wasn't fear or guilt that colored her words. It was desperation, the kind that only came when a person was backed into a corner with no way out. "Tell me what was taken," Father Brown said, his voice soft but firm, like he was coaxing a confession out of her. He had a way of making people speak, not because he pressured them, but because they realized, with startling clarity, that he already knew the truth. Marissa's eyes flickered for a moment, and then she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's a document, a letter to be precise. It's in the wrong hands now, and I need it back before it's too late." Father Brown didn't move, but his mind was already turning. "And why do you think I can help you with this?" he asked. "Because you're not like the others," she replied, the words dripping with something like contempt. "The police would never believe me. They'd just laugh it off. But you see things." Father Brown didn't acknowledge the compliment. "What's in this letter that's so important?" he asked, cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Marissa hesitated, her fingers tightening on the glass. "It's a confession," she said finally, her eyes a little too wide now, her voice tight. "A confession of a crime that's been hidden for years. A crime that involves people who have the power to make it all disappear. People who could ruin me if they knew I had it." Father Brown nodded slowly, the pieces beginning to fall into place. Marissa wasn't just a thief. She was a woman caught in something much bigger than she had anticipated. The letter wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a key to a door she was too afraid to open. So, You want me to find this document and return it to you before anyone else finds it? Father Brown asked. Marissa's lips pressed into a thin line. Yes. I've already been to the police. They don't care. They're in on it, Father. I'm telling you, this isn't just about stolen goods. It's about something much worse. Someone is playing a game with my life, and I need you to help me stop it. Father Brown studied her carefully, his mind working over her words. He had no doubt that she was telling the truth, or at least part of it. But what she wasn't telling him, what she hadn't said, was what bothered him the most. He knew how these things worked. People like Marissa didn't get involved in something like this unless they had something to hide themselves. You're not telling me everything, Marissa, Father Brown said, his voice quiet but insistent. What are you leaving out? For the first time, she flinched, her eyes flashing with something that might have been guilt or fear. I'm not involved in the crime, she said quickly, almost too quickly. I didn't know what it was when I took it, but now I know, and I'm trying to fix my mistake before it's too late. Father Brown let the silence hang between them for a moment, studying her face, looking for the cracks in her story. People like Marissa didn't just stumble into things like this. They made choices, whether those choices were made out of greed, ambition, or fear. And from the way she was sitting there, trying to appear composed, Father Brown had a sinking feeling that fear was what had driven her to this point. Who are these people you're afraid of? He asked softly. Who's behind all of this? Marissa's face darkened, and she looked around nervously, as if someone might be listening from the shadows. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping even lower. Vincent Delacroix, she said, barely above a whisper. He's the one who sent me to steal it, and now he wants it back. Father Brown's mind clicked. Delacroix. The name was familiar, too familiar. A man whose name came up whenever people talked about power in this city. He was a businessman, a philanthropist, but everyone knew the truth. Delacroix wasn't just running a legitimate business. He was a kingpin, a man who controlled everything in his orbit. People disappeared because of him. People got hurt because of him. And you think he knows you have it? Father Brown asked, his voice calm but firm. Marissa nodded slowly. I know he does. And that's why I can't go to anyone else. He'll kill me if I tell anyone what I know. He already killed Frank Rizzo. He doesn't care about anyone who gets in his way. Father Brown's expression remained unreadable, but inside he felt the familiar stirrings of unease. It wasn't the first time someone had come to him with a tale of danger involving Delacroix, but this felt different. This wasn't just about a missing document. This was about something deeper, something that would shatter the already fragile peace in the city. If Delacroix knows, then you're already a target, Father Brown said softly. You're caught in something that has no easy way out. But I'll help you. But you have to tell me everything, Marissa. Everything. She nodded, her face pale. I've told you everything I know, she said, her voice barely a whisper. I need you to find it before it's too late. Father Brown stood up slowly, his mind already working through the possibilities. Delacroix would stop at nothing to protect his secrets. And if Marissa was right, this was a case of a man's life hanging in the balance. The document wasn't just important, it was lethal. And the fact that Marissa had it, or had been sent to get it, meant she had already crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I'll find it, Father Brown said quietly, and I'll bring it to you. But you need to stay out of it. You can't keep playing this game. You're too deep. Marissa's eyes filled with tears But she didn't speak. She didn't need to. She knew, as well as Father Brown, that the moment you crossed people like Delacroix, there was no turning back. As Father Brown left the bar and stepped out into the rain, the city felt like it was closing in around him. He had seen too many people lose themselves in this kind of darkness. Too many people had crossed the line, taken one step too far, and had paid for it with their lives. But tonight, Father Brown was going to do what he did best: shine a light in the darkest corner of the city and reveal the truth that had been hiding in the shadows. The thief who loved the light was a woman who had only just begun to realize the price of the secrets she had stolen, and Father Brown was the one who would make sure she paid. Chapter 12. The Truth Behind the Veil. The rain had been falling steadily for hours, but the streets didn't seem any cleaner. If anything, the water only served to wash away what little dignity the city still had, leaving behind slick surfaces that mirrored the flickering neon lights. Father Brown didn't mind the rain. He'd grown used to the dark, the cold, and the dampness of both the world and its people. What bothered him wasn't the rain. It was the quiet that came with it. When the city was drenched in shadows, the secrets bubbled up like oil on water, and the sins of men had a way of making themselves known. Tonight, it was no different. He had been called to another case, another plea from someone who didn't know where to turn. The voice on the phone had been high-strung, desperate, just the way they always were when they knew they were about to disappear into the muck of the world. The woman's name was Rachel, and the urgency in her tone was like a crack in a dam. There was something in it that made Father Brown think she wasn't just asking for help. She was begging for a way out. Rachel Carmichael was well known in the city, though not for the reasons one would expect. She was married to one of the wealthiest men in town, Daniel Carmichael, a man whose fortune had been built on investments in shipping, oil, and a host of other industries that the average person could never touch. But Rachel, despite her gilded life, had never seemed to enjoy the opulence that came with it. She was beautiful, but it was the kind of beauty that faded the moment you looked too closely. There was something cold about her, something that made people wary, even in the most sophisticated circles. Father Brown had been to the Carmichael estate before, once or twice, for charity events and quiet conversations with the high society crowd that always seemed to gather there. The house was a mansion, as grand and empty as the people who lived inside it. But this time, Father Brown wasn't there for a social call. This time, he was here because Rachel had asked for him, and that was never a good sign. When he arrived at the estate, the mansion loomed in the distance, its stone walls washed in the pale light of the street lamps. He passed the gates without a second thought, his shoes clicking on the wet pavement as he walked up to the massive front door. A butler let him in without a word, guiding him through the dark, echoing hallways of the house. The only sounds were the creaks of old wood and the soft shuffle of footsteps as they approached a sitting room at the far end of the house. Rachel was sitting by the window when he entered, her back to him, her head tilted as if she were listening for something just beyond the glass. There was a glass of wine in her hand, though she hadn't taken a sip yet. She didn't turn when Father Brown entered, but he didn't mind. She didn't need to acknowledge him. He had learned long ago that silence spoke louder than words in a place like this. "You came," she said softly, her voice a low, almost melodic whisper. Father Brown didn't sit right away. He stood by the door, studying her, letting her words hang in the air for a moment. I came because you asked me to, he said, his voice quiet but firm. But you should know, Rachel, people don't ask for help unless they have no other choice. She finally turned to look at him, her eyes tired, almost haunted. I'm not asking for help, she said, a bitter smile curling on her lips. I'm asking for someone who can see things for what they are. You have that ability, Father. You can see through people's lies. Father Brown's gaze didn't waver. He had seen that look in people's eyes before, the one that came when they were running from something too ugly to face. Tell me what's going on, Rachel, he said quietly. Tell me why you've asked me here. She leaned back in her chair, the wine in her glass, swirling around the rim. It's about my husband, she said after a moment, her voice cold and distant. Daniel has been missing for 2 days. Father Brown didn't move, his expression unchanged. And the police? He asked. They're useless, she said, her voice clipped with frustration. They think he's just gone off on one of his business trips. But I know better. Daniel never leaves without telling me. He's been gone for 2 days, and no one seems to care. Not the police, not his business associates. No one. Father Brown walked over to the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back as he considered her words. And what makes you think this isn't just another business trip, Rachel? He asked softly. She stood up suddenly, the wine glass still in her hand. Because he left behind something important, she said, her voice tight with urgency. A letter I wasn't supposed to find. And it's not about business, Father. It's about something darker. Father Brown's eyes narrowed slightly, but he didn't respond right away. He had seen too many people spin stories to cover their own mistakes, and he suspected Rachel wasn't being entirely honest with him. There was something else, something she wasn't saying. Tell me about the letter, Father Brown said, his voice calm but insistent. Rachel hesitated, then walked over to a desk at the far end of the room. She pulled out a letter from the drawer and handed it to him. Father Brown unfolded it carefully. The letter was typed, no signature, just a few lines of text. You know too much. Don't think you can escape. We'll make sure you disappear like everyone else. Father Brown held the letter up, his eyes scanning it slowly. This letter doesn't tell me much, he said quietly, but it tells me that whoever left it wants you scared, and that's not something you should ignore. Rachel stepped closer to him, her eyes pleading. Do you see now? Do you see why I'm afraid? Daniel knew something that could destroy everything he built, and now I think they've taken him. They've taken him, Father, because he knew too much. Father Brown folded the letter and placed it back on the desk. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, looking at her. He had heard stories like this before, stories of men who got too close to something they shouldn't have, men who were swallowed by the darkness they tried to expose. What do you want me to do? Father Brown asked, his voice low. I want you to find him, Rachel said, her eyes filled with desperation. I want you to find him and bring him back. I know you can do it. I know you can find the truth. Father Brown stood still for a moment, his hands folded behind his back. He had an unsettling feeling, something nagging at the back of his mind, but he wasn't sure what it was. You said Daniel knew something. What did he know? She hesitated again, her gaze flickering toward the window. I don't know the details, Father, but I know it had to do with Vincent Delacroix. Father Brown's face didn't change, but his thoughts were already racing. Delacroix was a name that rang through the underworld like a bell tolling for the dead. He was powerful, too powerful for anyone to go up against without paying a price. The more Father Brown thought about it, the more it became clear that this wasn't just a missing person case. This was about power, money, and the kind of corruption that ate cities alive from the inside. "And you think Delacroix is behind this?" Father Brown asked, his voice steady but firm. Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with fear. "I'm sure of it, Father. Daniel was tangled up with him, and I think he found something that could bring Delacroix down. But now, I think Delacroix is trying to cover his tracks. And if he finds out I know about it—" Father Brown stopped her with a gentle wave of his hand. "You don't need to say anything more. I understand." Father Brown had dealt with men like Delacroix before, men who thought they could bury the truth beneath layers of lies and deceit. But the truth had a way of coming to light no matter how deep they tried to bury it. And Father Brown was going to make sure that this truth came to light, whether Delacroix liked it or not. "I'll find your husband, Rachel," Father Brown said softly, his voice calm but resolute. "But you need to stay out of it. Stay hidden. Stay safe." Rachel's lips parted as if she wanted to argue, but she stopped herself. "I'll do what you say, Father. But please, hurry." Father Brown turned to leave, his mind already turning over the details. He had a feeling this wasn't going to be easy. Delacroix didn't let go of his secrets without a fight, and the people who tried to expose him rarely made it out in one piece. But Father Brown wasn't afraid. He had faced darkness before, and he had always come out the other side, shining a light on the things that needed to be seen. The rain had slowed by the time Father Brown stepped out onto the wet streets, but the city still felt heavy, like it was waiting for something to break. As he walked down the slick sidewalk, he knew the truth was waiting for him, buried somewhere beneath the surface. He just had to find it, and when he did, he would bring it to light, no matter what it cost. The bell might not have rung, but Father Brown knew that the truth always found a way to speak, and he would be the one to hear it.